What is up guys, it's your boy Solam here, back with another classic WoW hardcore video. So over the course of the PTR for the hardcore servers, there's a couple of things that we are talking about, and there's a couple of things we're leaving feedbacks on. Now, I have a video series covering like changes on the PTR and so on, but throughout the beta cycle or the PTR cycle, it's also the time for us, the community, to come with feedback based on what we want to see in the game and what we don't want to see in the game before the actual launch of the servers, and voice our opinions on what's happening here. So for that, there's a couple of topics that we'll be talking about on a video per video basis, so one topic per video, and today I want to talk about Petrification Flask. This is something I've talked about before in a previous video, where I highlighted my personal opinions on this topic, which looks like this, talking about why I personally think the Flask should be nerfed in some way, shape or form. Today I want to approach this topic, the Petri Flask, with a different kind of point of view and highlight the pros of the Flask, the cons of the Flask, and some other variables that are worth knowing about and worth considering when talking about the Flask of Petrification. So far, until now, the information we have so far is that Blizzard intends to do nothing about the Flask and monitor its behavior, and if necessary, they will add some modifications or nerfs where necessary, but for now they're leaving it the way it is and monitoring it, and they are receptive to feedback. So this is probably my feedback. I have that one video covering my point of view, and today we're covering the pros, the cons, and what I could think about when it comes to the Petri Flask. And please leave your thoughts and comments in the comments down below as well, that way we can get multiple point of views on this Petri Flask. Now for this I have made a Word document, very simple video format once again, just highlighting some things that I think are worth knowing about for the Petri Flask. So here we go. First of all, I want to cover some of the pros for the Petri Flask. Now, number one, it's an obvious way to save your character. The way Petri Flask works is that it can turn into stone for a minute, and if you combine that in your raid or in a dungeon, and you use that with a macro to leave your group, you will also get teleported out of the dungeon after a minute, right? So by using Petri Flask and leaving group, you can effectively save your character from any instanced combat at any point. It's also, on hardcore servers, everywhere really, time is valuable. Leveling takes time. In Classic WoW, leveling should take you about 10 days of slash played. It kind of depends on what kind of person you are. Between 7 and 10 days, I would say, for most people. Let's just say between 100 and 150 hours. I think most people will be closer to the 150 hours mark. Now that means it takes a long time to level up, right? In this case, you have the average Joe versus streamer argument. A bunch of streamers, they would be against the Petri Flask because they can literally play all day, 8 to 10 hours every single day, because it's their job to play the game. For a bunch of people, if you have 1 hour to play every single day, on average, and it takes 150 hours to level up, that's half a year. That is half a year spent leveling from level 1 to level 60, and in this case, you can use the Petri Flask to save yourself that time, and if you don't enjoy leveling, that's just it's a task, right? Leveling would be a task in that case. It would be a mandatory chore to get you back to level 60. For a bunch of people, that's a massive hurdle to jump through, especially in Classic WoW, where once again, leveling takes about 150 hours for most people. Now, here's the thing, the Petri Flask won't 100% save you. Like I talked about, it has a 1 minute duration, and if you combine that with leaving a group, you can get teleported out. Sometimes, if you don't macro it correctly, or you just don't use it correctly or in time, you will need 2 Petri Flasks, and you also have to have the knowledge of when to use it, right? The Petri Flask can't be used when you're dead. You have to use it while you're still alive. You have to know what's happening, and you need to know when to press that button and actually press it in time. We'll get back to this one later, boys. Now let's talk about a couple of the cons for the Petri Flask. Now there's 2 big ones I could think about. I think there's several ones that we could talk about, but they're minor. These 2 I think kind of talks about all of them combined in 2 arguments. Number 1, it devalues the achievement of being a raid gear level 16. I don't think this one can be discussed really that much, because if you don't have Petri Flasks, being a well geared Naxxramas raid character is just simply more impressive. Having access to Petri Flasks do make raiding easier, makes raiding more accessible, that's just a fact, right? Not having the Petri Flasks adds a barrier to entry, adds more risk versus reward. In this case, more risk also makes the reward feels more rewarding, just like baseline. So in that case, being a geared level 60 would be more of an achievement and less of a common thing. Now, even with Petri Flasks, I don't think it will be a common thing, which we'll also get back to in the other part of the segment. Now, another con that I can think about for the Petri Flask is that it will cause a Petri raid meta. And what I mean by this is that a bunch of guilds will only raid, especially certain bosses, when they have Petri Flasks for their entire raid party. Now, this is already something we have seen on the previous Classic era servers when Hardcore was taking off before the Hardcore servers came out, right? Raid groups, big guilds only did certain bosses when their entire party had a Petri Flask. Now on Classic era we had a bunch of Petri Flasks because people literally copied over characters with thousands of gold and thousands of Black Lotus from Classic WoW when TBC Classic came out, and you had those character clone options, right? And from Season of Mastery, people could teleport over, or transfer over, I guess is the right word. So for the era service, we just had a bunch of Black Lotus sitting around, which meant that this meta wasn't really like that apparent because we always had Petri Flasks. For the Hardcore service, Petrification Flask will be kind of rare, and it will create a very weird Petri raid meta, where people will wait to do certain bosses simply because they don't have any Petri Flask, and Petri Flask will be locked behind a barrier to entry, and will be a limited supply based on Black Lotus, right? This will also get back to in just a little bit in the other segment, or the other part of this video, so let's talk about that for a second. First of all, Petri Flasks, well, this is probably going into like the why they might not have to nerf Petri Flask, but it's going to be expensive. Black Lotus is going to be incredibly rare to begin with. It's pretty rare, like overall in Classic WoW, only spawns in certain locations. It was very expensive in Classic WoW's launch as well, and I can think about, I can just say it's going to be way more expensive on the Hardcore servers. It's going to be very difficult to obtain. I also think top guilds will actually be farming Black Lotus for weeks/months for their own raids. I do know like at least 2 big guilds are going for like Race to World first and Race to Realm first and so on. So in this case, they will try their best to control the Black Lotus market to provide Petrification Flasks for their own raid setup inside their guild, right? Because how many Petris you actually have do to some extent determine how much raiding you can do per week. So in this case, those guilds might have literal Black Lotus mafias set up to funnel their own Petrification Flasks. So they will be really expensive and difficult to get, pretty much semi-unavailable to the average Joe. If you're just a regular person, not in a top raiding guild, it's going to be difficult to get both the Flasks and the Black Lotus to begin with, and they will be pretty scarce, like for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. Now this one is a little bit speculative. I'm just like speculating the top guilds will be doing a Black Lotus Mafia shuffle, but we'll see how that one works out. Now, one of the other things worth talking about here is greed, and this is not the type of greed you might think about. It's not like a gold greed, but a greed in terms of like you have a Petri in your bag, but you don't want to use a Petri. Let's just say Petrification Flasks cost 250 gold or even more, but let's just say 250. That's a massive chunk of gold at the launch of the servers. In this case, you don't want to click that button unless you know you would have died if you didn't click. In this case, a bunch of people will be very hesitant to click their Petri Flask button, and it might literally cause them to die thanks to greed. This is something we've seen previously on Classic era as well, where people don't click their Petri Flasks, and not just Petri Flasks, this is something that happens all the time. People just play in a greedy way because they're min-maxing. If you don't have to click your Petri Flask, you won't click it, right? And you're probably not going to use Petri on 50% health unless you know there's a wipe incoming. So in this case, greed could literally be the reason why a bunch of people will die even if they have Petri Flasks in their bags. Now the risk versus reward ratio and the time efficiency, like farming gold for Lotus versus just raiding safe. So this is going all the way back to the Petri raid meta, where you only do certain raids when everyone in your group or everyone in the raid setup has a Petri Flask. but at some point, farming that gold, let's just say it costs 250 gold for a Petri Flask, at the launch, and you can farm, let's just say 25 gold per hour, that's 10 hours of farming for one flask. At some point, you might just say, let's just not farm today, and just do the raid normally, instead of farming those Petries. Now, I think Petries will be more and more used over time, because once again, Black Lotus will be scarce to begin with, and over time we just have more Black Lotus entering the market, and we have more leftover Black Lotus from week to week. So after a couple of months, Petries will be more and more common, more and more used, but for the first couple of months I think it will be very scarce, and I think more people will opt to just raid the safe instead of farming for Petries. Now also the Thunder Fury incident, even if you have a flask of Petries, you're not 100% safe, you might die at any point, once again referring back to greed, you might just not click it, or you might die before even having the opportunity to click your Petri, or you might simply not click it in time. Literally, the only warrior with Thunder Fury in Classic WoW Hardcore on Classic Era, he died with Petri in his bags because he didn't click it in time. Now I just wanted to include this one because I see a lot of people saying that if you have Petri you will never die, and Petri Flasks are a failsafe, they will always carry you. In this case it simply won't. It's not 100% safe. The literal best geared warrior with Thunder Fury died with a Petri in his bags, and it's just something that's going to happen, right? You can die even if you have a Petri in your bag. That's just like something I wanted to close the video off on real quick there. But I just wanted to make this video real quick, talk about the pros and the cons of the Petri, because the previous one I just highlighted my personal opinion. Now I'm sticking by that one. Even though I can see the pros, I still think it should be nerfed to some degree, or preferably they could just take away the what is it called, the mechanic where once you leave a raid or a group you get automatically teleported out after a minute. If they just remove that, then the Petri issue is also pretty much gone with it at the same time, because even if you nerf Petri to only last for 30 seconds, players are going to find their way to stall. They're just going to chain target dummies or something to stall, to still teleport out. So I think the best way to nerf Petries is to not even nerf Petries. It's to literally remove or nerf the actual teleporting out of the instance. Just like my 2 cents on the topic, I think Petries are a big topic and a necessary one to talk about before the launch of the official service. So once again, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I would really appreciate reading all of your thoughts on that one. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for more Classic WoW content. As always, I'm streaming live on Twitch and on Kick pretty much every single day, so if you want more content, come and check me out over there. That's pretty much what I have for you today. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon.